Not we. You.
Hate is a very exciting emotion. I hate you so much that I think I'm going to die from it. Darling.
In the 1940s and 1960s, Glenn Ford was Hollywood's golden boy. He shared the film alongside Marlon Brando, Bette Davis, and Rita Hayworth in over 100 parts over 5 decades and became the top box office performer in 1958. However, seeing solely his glory will not reveal his true self. Glenn loved one woman until his death, but never married her. He abandoned his son for nearly 50 years. He married 4 times and had hundreds of star affairs. However, his son had to go to court to stop a nurse from placing a do not resuscitate order on his hospital bed. Gilda, The Big Heat, and Blackboard Jungle were his most famous performances, but he died alone in a hospital bed no one cared about. Glenn Ford was a decent man, but he wasn't a good father, husband, or lover. The underlying inconsistencies and irrevocable mistakes made him one of the most tragic and complex individuals in Hollywood history, a legend who never spoke until his son wrote everything down. Gwilym Samuel Newton Ford, Glenn Ford's full name, was born in Portneuf, Quebec, on May 1, 1916. The blood in his veins was unusual. His father was a cousin of Sir John Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, and his mother was a descendant of Martin Van Buren, the 8th U.S. President. From birth, Glenn was torn between tradition and prestige and international dreams. When Glenn was 8 years old, his family left Canada and moved to Santa Monica, California, a decision that shaped his life. The Canadian boy debuted on stage under the Pacific Coast sun. Glenn first experienced the seductive draw of living within another's story in Santa Monica High School plays. He may have learned to disguise his own from that time. Glenn joined tiny West Coast theater organizations after graduating in 1934. He was poor, yet had laborer's hands. Besides performing, he was an electrician, construction worker, carpenter, and family home repairman. His strict railroad CEO father suggested he study a trade in case Hollywood didn't need him. No one expected that Hollywood would require Glenn Ford, not the genuine man, but the ideal man people wanted to believe in. He failed a 1937 20th Century Fox audition. He failed again a year later, but he persisted. Columbia Pictures made Glenn Ford a Hollywood icon from a little Canadian community. Harry Cohn's daring but deliberate effort to sign Glenn Ford to a long-term deal with Columbia Pictures in 1939. Cohn chose to develop Columbia's actors rather than buy them from other studios. Glenn and William Holden were picked. Harry Cohn frankly stated, Glenn's first leading part in Heaven with a barbed wire fence was Rocky. On set, director Ricardo Cortez called him a bad actor and vowed never to work with him again. Glenn nearly assaulted him at a diner years later, still enraged. Hollywood is where one breakthrough can change everything. Glenn Ford and Rita Hayworth made cinema history with Gilda in 1946. Rita was the era's sex icon. Glenn, calm and unobtrusive, was the ideal balance. While Rita was the focus, Glenn's performance left a lasting impression, and from that film on, the two began into an uncertain, unsettling connection that lasted 4 decades. After Gilda, Glenn's career took off. Among his many famous films, The Big Heat, 1953, garnered him an Oscar nod for his noir detective role. As a teacher in a disorderly classroom, Blackboard Jungle, 1955, pioneered educational dramas with Sidney Poitier, satire with Marlon Brando, Tea House of the August Moon, 1956. Horseback riding and shooting talents helped him succeed in westerns with 3:10 to Yuma, 1957, and Cowboy, 1958. Glenn Ford earned the top box office spot in 1958, an unusual feat for an actor who shunned flamboyance, controversies, and a low-key personality. Glenn played roles in Cimarron, 1960, The Courtship of Eddie's Father, 1963, The Rounders, 1965, and Heaven with a Gun, 1969, despite the 1960s mixed quality. He continued to succeed in television with Cades County, The Family Holvac, and Once an Eagle in the 1970s as the film industry faded. His final film role was a brief but emotional appearance as Jonathan Kent, Superman's adopted father, in 1978's Superman. Just a gaze, no complicated lines or huge motions. Glenn's steadiness, grace, and gentle compassion touched the crowd again. He played lesser roles in his later years, such as Day of the Assassin, 1979. Yet everyone understood. The golden period of Glenn Ford was over, and unredeemed things loomed ahead. The lady he loved, the son he abandoned, and the self he never forgiven. Many celebrities sold war bonds or performed for the military during World War II. Glenn Ford followed suit until 1943's Destroyer, when he told the director, "I can't keep portraying a soldier." He joined the Marine Corps Reserve. The decision rocked Hollywood. Columbia Pictures CEO Harry Cohn was outraged. He was promoting Glenn as the studio's top star. Glenn elected to go. Instead of acting, he wanted to be a soldier, though life didn't offer him a full heroic arc. Glenn developed major health issues after joining the Marine Corps' Public Relations Division. He was diagnosed with duodenal ulcer, a condition that caused extreme agony and kept him hospitalized for 5 months, preventing deployment. He kept his displeasure to himself, since he wanted to prove his worth. After his 1944 discharge, he returned to movies. Glenn Ford was proud to serve even if he never saw war. He became a lieutenant commander in the Naval Reserve and oversaw military media and cultural outreach. Glenn received France's highest honor, the Legion of Honor, in 1992 for helping citizens fleeing the Nazis. His post-war films, fundraising tours, and humanitarian efforts conveyed his image, passion, and commitment to justice. Although he never fired a rifle in war, Glenn Ford carried the soldier's code throughout his life. Calm, responsible, and sometimes too alone to ask for help. Though the military regarded him as a loyal serviceman in his personal life, he couldn't hang on to anyone. His brightness was admired, but that radiance drove loved ones away. That started another tragedy: love, marriage, and a father-son tie that never healed, quiet, enduring, and deeper than any battlefield. Glenn Ford made his film debut in the 1940s, the lady in question opposite a stunning young lady. Her name was Rita Hayworth. Neither was famous yet. Both actors were only starting out, but they had a natural connection and a cinematic spark that flared in looks and lingered in quiet on film. 6 years later, in 1946, they reunited in Gilda, grown in talent and emotion. They had an unnamed love after Gilda became famous. "I never viewed Gilda as a movie," remarked Glenn. It was recalled. Rita, famous and lonely, found something she had always craved in Glenn: silent security. But timing prevented it. Rita married Edward Judson when Glenn was unmarried. Glenn married Eleanor Powell before Rita divorced. After that, she married Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan. They were usually off-kilter, but always found each other. Rita told Glenn that the acreage next door had recently been listed for sale, while she resided in Beverly Hills with her then-husband, screenwriter James Hill. Glenn acted immediately. He acquired it and erected a house steps from Rita's backyard wall. After Glenn moved in, Rita filed for divorce 1 day later. Nothing was spoken. Everyone understood. Rita could cross the back fence without the press knowing once Glenn constructed a little gate. They ate breakfast, sunbathed by Glen's pool, and lived as unknown lovers in Hollywood. Rita joked to the press in 1972 that Glen is the best neighbor a lady could want. The smile hid a deeper truth. To each other, everything, but never truly each other's. Glen Ford never forgot Rita, despite many other affairs throughout the years. He stated, "I adored her always," and that every movie she was in was one of his favorites. Rita started losing her memory in 1981. Hollywood beauty and vivacity was steadily losing everything, even herself, when doctors diagnosed her with early-onset Alzheimer's. Glen stayed. He discreetly cared for her in her final days. Glen was a pallbearer for Rita's 1987 death, aged 68, walking gently behind her casket. No words, no tears, yet everyone understood. A silent ocean broke within him. They never revealed what happened during those 40 years. They never married or lived together, but they were never fully apart. Glen claimed in a Rita Hayworth documentary that she will always be part of him. Hollywood may have hidden the most beautiful and saddest love story from spectators. Glen Ford married Eleanor Powell, but never loved her properly, like Rita Hayworth, whom he never married but loved deeply. Glen, a military officer, met Eleanor, Hollywood's reigning tap dance queen, at a war bond fundraising party in 1943. Eleanor had formerly outshone her co-stars in MGM's great musicals. Glen admired her grace, courage, and selflessness. In less than a year, they married. He lived with his mother, she with hers. The couple moved into a 22-room Beverly Hills house after the wedding, symbolizing Glen's elevation from the working class, and where Eleanor stopped her artistic career. In her prime, she left the stage, the audience, and the applause to marry Glen Ford and have their only child, Peter, at 33. Born in 1945, Glen was entering his career's golden years, but her devotion wasn't enough to ground him. Eleanor dedicated her life to their family, while Glen had a series of extramarital encounters, from co-stars to brief romances. Peter Ford claims his father captured over 140 confidential discussions with Hollywood stars: Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe, Joan Crawford, Geraldine Brooks. Eleanor was most wounded by the long, unexplained coldness, not the arguments or public breakdowns. They lived separately in that huge 3-story house. Eleanor lived upstairs. Glen stayed downstairs. 3 people lived together: their son Peter, his grandmother Hannah, and them. None impacted the other's reality. Peter subsequently recalled, "My father didn't hug me or talk to my mother. He only emerged when needed and then vanished." After 16 years of a sham marriage, Eleanor quietly filed for divorce in 1959, just as Peter turned 14. Glen signed the papers willingly. Eleanor took her son, but not the heart of the man she had sacrificed everything for. Eleanor never married again or loved anybody else for 23 years. She silently dedicated herself to charity, raising her kid, and religious activity, as if her life was spent atoning for a love that came at the wrong moment with the wrong guy. Her ashes were buried in a simple metal urn at Hollywood Forever Cemetery after her 1982 cancer death. No media, no big service. Only Peter, the boy she called, was there. The only reason to continue. Glen skipped the funeral. Maybe he was occupied. He might not have known how to handle it. Only one child of Glen Ford's hundreds of girlfriends bore his name. His father was a shadow, yet Peter Newton Ford grew up in that house. Eleanor Powell received custody after divorcing in 1959. Glen didn't argue. He also stopped communicating. Glen was mostly absent during Peter's childhood. No letters, calls, or guidance when his son first faced the world. Peter stated, "He was my biological father, but absent. My dad loved women and work. loved everything except fatherhood. Glenn provided a small monthly support check, just enough to avoid being considered irresponsible, but never enough to fill the void of an empty childhood. Peter lived with his mother and grandmother in a house where the past never left, while starring in films as brave men and loving fathers. It was even worse because Glenn and Peter often worked together, especially on the 1970s TV show Cades County. The two were colleagues on set, more estranged than strangers. No father-son hugs, lunches, or proud glances after filming. And then, time did what no one could stop. Glenn aged. Several strokes left him unable to walk. His memory deteriorated, a wheelchair was needed, and became utterly dependent. During this time, he phoned Peter for help, not as a son. However, under one roof again, there were no different floors, only a devastated father and a boy struggling to make sense of his existence. Surrounded by medical devices and scattered memories, Peter asked, Glenn told, unheard stories. Affairs long hidden, concerns never acknowledged, a rich life lived to the fullest, but never truthfully with his own dad. Peter remembered in a subsequent interview, for the first time, my father gazed at me long and said, "Do you remember when you were little?" That's when I knew he was trying to fix things. Late, but sincere. Peter's 2011 memoir, Glenn Ford, A Life, followed Glenn's death, not to condemn or avenge, but to convey the narrative his father had kept concealed his whole life. A man once admired by the world and adored by the most beautiful ladies could only ask his abandoned son to write for him 2 words he could never express himself. Understood. Glenn Ford was revered in Hollywood at his peak. The public no longer knew Glenn Ford in his final years. No longer focused gaze, upright posture, acute memory, or comfortable smile. After turning 70, Glenn had a series of increasingly severe strokes. His nervous system degenerated, his memories hazed, his body stopped obeying him. Once a skilled film set walker, he now used a wheelchair and was fully dependent on others. Glenn lived with Pauline Kernan, a younger full-time private nurse, instead of his son. Things became suspicious. Peter Ford says his father trusted Pauline totally. Glenn revised his will to give her most of his estate, excluding most family members. Peter broke down when he realized that Pauline had placed a DNR order outside Glenn's hospital room, despite him being lucid, communicative, and wanting to live. Peter went to court to save his father's life, not for money. The DNR order was rescinded, care parameters changed, and Pauline removed as Glenn's medical proxy after the hearing. Not merely a legal battle. After years of emotional distance, a son faced his father for the last time. After the incident, Glenn personally invited Peter and his family to live with him. After that, he was no longer a cinematic legend, attractive lover, or inattentive parent. He was old and fragile, shrunk, holding to what was left of the one hug that had finally opened to him. Glenn lived quietly for a few years. He quit acting, interviewing, and writing. In Beverly Hills, once a refuge of love with Rita and echoing with Peter's youthful glee, just wheels on tile and a breathing machine remained. Late-day sighs fade like mist. Glenn Ford died quietly at 4 p.m. on August 30th, 2006. He was 90. There was no Hollywood farewell or big funeral. He had Bismar, his devoted dog who had always slept by his bedside, buried beside him in Woodland Cemetery in Santa Monica at his request. Calm but serious ending. The audience would always see him as a symbol. But to himself, his life may have been a protracted hunt for one thing: forgiveness from his beloved women, his son he left, and the man he never reconciled with. Glenn Ford was never a loud star. He didn't wave his arms on screen or play the publicity game in real life. Because of that, Glenn became the kind of actor a generation of American audiences trusted, empathized with, and saw as a reflection of themselves. He played the teacher in Blackboard Jungle, the cop in The Big Heat, the Western farmer in Cowboy, and the father in Superman. The crowd wasn't overwhelmed by his roles. He made them feel comfortable, connected, and softly heartbroken when he failed. Critics dubbed Glenn Ford average man in exceptional circumstances, not Clark Gable, Marlon Brando, or James Dean. However, Glenn Ford was the scene partner everyone wanted to work with, and the man viewers believed was real. Over 50 years, Glenn Ford starred in over 100 films in practically every genre. Superman, the movie, 1978, film noir, Gilda, The Big Heat, social drama, Blackboard Jungle, The Doctor and the Girl, westerns, 3:10 to Yuma, The Fastest Gun Alive, Jubal, comedies, The Tea House of the August Moon, The Courtship of Eddie's Father, and Superhero. He topped the American box office in 1958. Few actors maintained this distinction for more than a year, holding it for 4. Unfortunately, few remember Glenn Ford now. No towering homage on Hollywood Boulevard, lavish memorial after his death, or revival campaigns for his classic films like those for Humphrey Bogart or John Wayne. Peter Ford said, "My father was famous till he died," in an interview. His name disappeared from Hollywood talks within months. It could be because Glenn avoided controversy. There were no scandals, public meltdowns, or terrible deaths like previous icons. Glenn Ford died as he lived, silently, without pleading to be remembered. That's what makes him memorable, because his legacy isn't statues or festivities. Every scene when he didn't act had it, yet simply existed. A lingering glance, a constrained line, a man who was never perfect but eerily genuine. Glenn Ford never sought immortality. He never fought for fame, dazzled on stage, or exploited his pain to control others. But that's why he's one of the toughest to forget artists. Once you sit calmly and look behind the curtain, his life was a series of paradoxes between love and distance, light and shade, the public admired man, and the man his family never understood. He loved one woman for 40 years, but could never marry her. Abandoned his only child only to return, asking for pardon when time was nearly gone. Reached the heights of glory and then fell into obscurity without fanfare. His name may be forgotten in Hollywood. The films that made him famous may be stored. You've touched Glenn Ford's legacy if you've watched Gilda, been moved by his stare in The Great Heat, felt his presence in Blackboard Jungle, or felt soothed seeing him as Superman's father. A legacy of knowing a man like that existed, not titles or medals. Calm, strong, and scarred. If you think legends like Glenn Ford, who were true to themselves till the end, should be recognized, appreciated, and respected, share this story. Have you seen Glenn Ford movies? Remember him? Please remark to keep his name alive. Please subscribe to our channel for more untold, amazing, mythical stories.